Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. We're finally here. The two-part finale of Season 2 of Everybody Loves Raymond, The Wedding. Like I mentioned at the end of Season 1, for the first 6 seasons, each season finale was a flashback episode. First season ended with us seeing how and why Ray and Debra moved in across the street from his parents when, although they love him, it's more trouble than it's worth. This episode, as the title suggests, we get to see how these two tied the knot. But it goes back a step further than that. We actually get to see how Ray proposed, how the beginning of the marriage planning went, and then we see the big day after all. And from what we've seen in the show before, there is some hijinks that ensue. Well, the story is told through a very interesting frame. Like a majority of these flashback episodes, there is a framing device that bookends the main part of the plot. With the first one, it's something that happens and them going, why did we do this? And in this one, Ray and Debra are getting ready for another wedding. There's a deleted scene that segues into what we see here, where Ray's not gotten ready and Debra's fully ready, and he's like, aren't you going to get ready? Which it's funny, but I can see why they cut it for time. It begins here where Ray's getting ready, getting everything done, she's helping. And then they're musing like, why'd you marry me? And then flashback. And then of course in the end it's like, oh yeah, that's why. And they're dancing. Ray doesn't like dancing, but when it's a romantic moment and it feels right, he usually will. And dancing with Debra and their kids, perfect way to end the episode, especially with the accordion music. Which I know sounds odd, like, what, accordion music? We'll get there. As I mentioned before, we get to see the proposal. Ray, you can tell he's a bit nervous. Friends come over. He has to get them out of there. Debra comes in. He's trying to make it a perfect romantic moment. And things just keep popping up. First his dad comes in, then his mother comes in. They come in after he shows Debra that he's now a columnist for Newsday. Because he just got promoted. Frank steals the thunder while reading the column, which he was going to try to read with Debra, and he pulled the old Debra, will you marry me inside the column, which Debra says yes to. Now, it's a very funny scene, and there is some good drama in there too, because you could see the actors working off each other. I mean, 2 seasons in, they all got a good chemistry with each other, and it plays well in this flashback, especially because you could see the shock and all the different emotions going through Debra's face. Patricia Heaton plays it so well. But it does kind of clash with something that is said in the pilot episode, and that is that Ray proposed multiple times. And he got 2 rejections, took a year off, came back with a job, boom, she said yes. That part of it is fine with, because he just got the promotion and he asked. But there's no indication of the previous 2 proposals in the dialogue. I don't know if they're just ignoring it just for the sake of the moment, or if they forgot. But if it's that one, you guys had the episode on hand, you could have gone back and did it. Or it should be one of those things like that you guys should have notes, okay, after every episode. Like, put there, alright, that's a little fact thing, we gotta put that there. Just one thing I noticed rewatching it this time that I never noticed before about it. Could also be the show retconning that thing in the pilot, it's just being facetious on Ray's part, but either way, it's just weird that they didn't acknowledge it. Plus, one thing that we see later when Debra does get the ring and then her parents show up, did they forget already in the Diamonds episode that Debra said she didn't want to show her mother that stone unless she just shows it briefly and then just hides it? Because they do have Debra go and look at it under the light, if at all briefly. So in that moment, she should have realized that stone was a piece of crap. Her not mentioning it jives with what we found out in that episode and fits with Debra's personality, especially since she's happy about the wedding coming up. But it's weird that they would even have it be in the same scene. I know it works for the episode, but from a continuity standpoint, it's one of those things that also kind of bugged me a little bit. But as I've said before, sitcom writing. Ray does feel a little guilty in the way that he did ask Debra to marry him, other than the fact that it was ruined by his parents and brother coming in. Because he feels like it's just like when they ask at a ballpark. She has to say yes in the moment. She doesn't want to get beer thrown at her. She doesn't want to feel like a jerk. Even though, from what I've read, there are people who'll still say no, or they'll do what Ray was thinking, that she wanted to say no, but she was pressured to say yes, and later in private she'll say no. But as Robert rightfully points out, you know why she said yes, Raymond? Because she loves you. And when he does give her the ring, that is accurate, so Robert knows what he's talking about there. That's why he's the best man for this wedding. And then, of course, later on, when Robert and Amy tie the knot, Ray is his best man. Funny thing that they both are having issues with the toasts. In the final episode, you wouldn't know that from Robert, but that's another deleted scene for this episode. This one has a bunch of deleted scenes where Robert is like, I got nothing for the toast. And then partially due to his fear of public speaking and partially due to he just can't think of anything. Which, of course, later on when he does say something, it's truthful, but heartfelt. The way he words it and ties it into the whole wedding thing. Debra's parents, of course, show up again here. You know, Debra just got engaged, so they're going to show up to help begin the wedding planning. And this is where things start to go a little bit off the rails for Raymond. And it's one time of a few where I see myself siding with Ray. Those of you who've seen the episode, you already know what I'm probably going to be talking about. Those who haven't, it's that Ray, when it was just him and Debra, they were talking about the size of the wedding, and he was mentioning preferring a smaller wedding, or like, would you care if it's a small wedding? Part of it is him talking it back into him still not being so certain that she wants to marry him for him and not just to get the wedding thing, which I can kind of understand, especially since he's a little bit younger here compared to what we see him at later. And he's actually younger than me in this scene. And with his hesitation, you could see why he'd be thinking this and asking these questions. But at the same time, you could also understand that if he doesn't want a big, gigantic, super wedding, which of course it looks kind of like Debra's leaning in that direction. Maybe not like something like a huge ball gala, but a typical wedding. And then when Ray mentions what he was having in mind for a small wedding to Debra and her parents, he says like 50 guests, and they just laugh it off. Like, excuse me, Debra? Excuse me, Debra's parents? You're really gonna laugh him off? I mean, and they even say, that's not a wedding, that's a barbecue. And technically you could only have a wedding with the parties and a witness. 50 guests still sounds like a decent-sized wedding. You get 25 for one side, 25 for the other. Boom, it's perfect. Even if that. You don't have to have a super-duper large wedding for it to be a wedding. And I think this is a very... it's subtle and yet not subtle at the same time, because they're in your face about laughing about it, but they never address it as such. But I think this is also a little bit of an indication of the difference of how the two characters were raised. Whereas, of course, Debra was raised in Connecticut. Her parents have a little bit of money. Ray, middle-class parents living on Long Island. Frank was an accountant for many years. So, a little bit of difference in the economic, social class. And I know that they did it this way in order to speed up the story a little bit, but shouldn't the initial wedding planning just be between the two? I mean, discuss with the parents for financial stuff to make sure they're fine with paying it, but shouldn't most of the wedding planning stuff be between them two? Just my 2 cents on the matter. I mean, I've never actually planned a wedding or anything, but the way I look at it from a logical standpoint, if it's for the bride and groom, shouldn't they be the ones doing majority of the actual planning, unless they delegate certain tasks to family members? That's a thought. This episode marks the first appearance of Charles Durning as Father Hubble on the show. And, of course, he's a character that they do a complete retcon with later on, because here, he's presented as Debra's family priest. Whereas in later episodes, he becomes the Baron's family priest. And I think that's part of the reason that why, when this episode is shown in its syndication, they cut off the first part of his original scene where he's introduced to Raymond. The whole talk thing, and they cut right to when they're beginning their little talk about, you know, why do you want to marry each other? And Hubble trying to figure out if the two are actually ready for that step, or if they need to have a semi-lengthy engagement to figure out if this is where they want to go. And Hubble, at first, you could tell, he likes Ray, but he's like a little put off by him, which he does acknowledge later. Nice little thing. And part of it is Ray still being in that mindset of, are you sure you want to marry me? Because he points out the difference in wording, which is something to note, but you don't put it out and then call him Debra a liar at one point. It's like, Ray, put your insecurities to the side, which he does eventually. And Charles Durning, he's always good to see. I mean, I liked him in that sadly short-lived Supreme Court show, which maybe that's one show I'll do a episode by episode review of one of these days if I can track down every episode. But if you think about it, that show was almost 20 years ago now, and a few years after that, it'll be 20 years since I first saw it, but it's still a memory in my head. You gotta love Charles Durning. Of course, you can't go talk about Charles Durning without saying two words. Fried chicken! The wedding comes, there's nerves all around. Ray's still a bit nervous, still having those negative thoughts in his head. And Frank, trying to be fatherly, gives him a small bottle of Jack Daniels. And I love the way that this is shown in the episode where he's like looking at the bottle, contemplating it, he looks up at the cross, and you're wondering, is he going to drink it or not? And the next time we see Ray, he seems a little aloof, he seems a little like, yeah. And we're led to believe, oh no, he drank it. And he's very aloof during the wedding ceremony. He goes down, he takes Debra from her father to finish walking up the aisle themselves, which they don't play the traditional wedding march. It's actually another song that's just as beautiful called Clair de Lune by Claudia Debussy. It's an excellent wedding song. And we do hear it again later on in season 4 with the wedding tape episode, when they just use footage from the episode and splice it a little bit with the football game. He's a little aloof, very lovey-dovey. Father Hubble thinks it's just him coming around, and he's how God intended a groom to be on their wedding day, which at this point in the episode is a riot. And I just love when it cuts to Ray's parents wondering what's going on. Marie's like, "Why is Raymond acting like this?" Frank's trying to play dumb, but the way that Peter Boyle plays it, you can tell that in his mind he's thinking like, yeah. He doesn't say anything until after the wedding and they're at the reception, when Debra says Ray's demeanor during the wedding was cute, and Frank is just like, without missing a beat, cute. That's a new word for it. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to be at the bar getting cute. Only Peter Boyle could deliver the line the way he did. And it's after this, when Debra gets mad, suspecting Ray's drunk, we find out he did not drink the alcohol. The seal's still intact. That was all him out there. That was all him realizing, this is my wedding. Debra loves me. I love her. I've been having all this negative thing. I'm just going to kick it out. Because if there's one thing that his father, given that alcohol, did encourage, and that was him just kicking his nerves out and, in a way, using it. Like when I did job interviews, I was always nervous, and I would just channel those nerves in the interview and use it as energy to get through the interview and to hopefully make a good first impression. In a similar fashion, Ray did the same here, and he did have a good impression at the wedding. And of course, Debra, when she sees it, is like, that really was you out there. Yeah. I think in that moment, she loves Ray already, but I think seeing that he can be happy, can be romantic when he needs to be and wants to be, I think that Debra fell even more in love with him from a story standpoint at that moment. I know it sounds mushy and cliche, but it can happen. And that ending dance between them as it segues into the bookend is a perfect way to end this episode. Character-wise, this is the last appearance of Kevin James on the show as his character Kevin. Next couple times we see him in Season 3, he's going to be playing his character Doug from King of Queens, which, as I said before, I understand. I mean, he's got his own show, so if he cameos, he'll want to play his character. Especially since the first time he cameos, it's part of a unofficial 2-parter crossover, which I'm still not sure if I'm going to review that episode or not. I'll have to try and track it down. He gets his own show, you can see why he wouldn't want to cameo anymore, but it's sad because Kevin goes off into the void along with Leo and the bridesmaids characters too, because they're in one of the deleted scenes, and they come in and the way they react with Debra, you think they're longtime friends, but then off into the void they go. Considering that Robert's in the wedding party, obviously one of them can't be Amy, even though they're longtime friends, because then that would be another little plot thingy, because they don't meet until season 1. You'd have it be another friend of hers that appears on the show occasionally, but No, they decided to be just some random people, probably friends of hers from when she grew up in Connecticut that she always said would be part of the wedding party. It's also sadly the last appearance of Phil Leeds as Uncle Mel because after this episode finished and aired, he passed away. But this is quite an appearance to go out on. Just him telling Ray he looks like a bus toilet, and then introducing him to his business partner Lewis, who is played by Ray's father, Albert Romano, which he has a little bit more hair in this appearance. And it's the typical joke we get with Mel. We're not gay. But again, it's kind of hard not to think he might be gay here because of how he says business partner. It's like, oh yeah, maybe. And they never really do confirm or deny one way or another if Uncle Mel is supposed to be gay. I'm just guessing that he probably is straight. It's just the stigma that from the time he grew up in. You know, man, single his whole life, always has a lot of male friends. I can kind of see why. I can imagine that Frank probably, whenever they bring it up, probably would be like this. Those of you don't wondering what that is, gonna be from a later episode. And of course, even though in the final episode it's mainly just a background cameo role, this is also the first appearance of Fred Stoller as Cousin Gerard, who is from Marie's side of the family, but Fred looks like he could be related to Ray, and also the way he speaks in character. You could also say he's related to Ray like that. I know the way someone speaks and all that, not really indicative of being related, but sometimes you can have a similar voice to someone. I mean, just look at James Earl Jones and his dad. They have similar voices. I mean, they're different, but they're similar, and of course they look similar in the face, so there's that. And of course, similar facial features and all that. I mean, maternal side of the family, but it fits. Ray can be awkward at times, but Cousin Gerard is even more awkward. Ridiculously so. Kind of like how I was in my early 20s, I would say, but he's in his 30s by this point. He was part of another deleted scene where he auditioned with his accordion, which he does end up using it when they renew their vows, so it's a plot point they use later. And even though it doesn't sound anything like the accordion music at the end, I think that's why they went with that. That is supposed to be music he would play, or they just decided to go with a romantic sounding accordion music for it to tie into that plot point. And then when it got deleted in editing, they're like, we'll just still use it. It's a nice melody to end the physical scene on to segue into the credits. Of course, with that, in dialogue or on set, there is no sign of Ray wanting to plan the one-man wedding band. Which, of course, we find out later that was something that he showed Debra, and then she's like, nah, I'll plan it. Which that definitely seems to be a retcon, because what we see in episode, there's no indication of Ray not wanting to help with the planning. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Considering what we see in this episode, it could be he did try to help, but many of his ideas were cast aside based on plans that Debra already had, or an idea of the type of wedding she wanted, and plus how he feels in this episode. And eventually he just decided to do zippers to see what you would think, and then when she said we'll handle everything, be like, alright. And then of course of that episode he just frames the story just to suit the needs of the moment when he's telling it to Robert, if I remember right. Ray's father is not the only family member who's in this episode, because his daughter Alexandria plays the flower girl we see at the wedding. She's prominent in several shots. I mean, you got to get that other Romano on screen somehow. And she would later appear as the daughter of Ray's arch nemesis Peggy, the cookie lady, who is also friends with Ray's on-screen daughter Allie. And I have a feeling that backstage they probably were friends, because whenever we see them together on screen, they do have a good chemistry. And I have a feeling that this type of friendship probably arose naturally. It'd probably be when Ray would have Alexandria with him on set. Probably talked with Madeline, just set friendships develop from there. That's just me throwing that out based on the chemistry I remember from their episodes, but it's logical, gonna happen. We'll just have to wait and see if it's mentioned in any of the commentaries. Which, I'm actually surprised there's no commentary for this episode. But I'm guessing that since it's a two-parter, they decided this early not to do one. I mean, they do one on Italy in Season 5, but that, of the two-parters, that is one you definitely want a commentary on, just from a filmmaking standpoint. And this early, they seem to only do commentaries on 2 episodes. So they did it for the first of the classic episodes, and an episode that was important from other character standpoints. Since we are at the end of Season 2, What would be my 5 favorite episodes of the series? Now that we're at the end of season 2, what would be my 5 favorite episodes of the season? Well, this was hard to narrow down, but in a few days before I recorded this video, I was mulling it over, and I got a good one for you. I'm going to say it in the order that they come out, so that if you want to watch these 5, just to get a feel for how the season is, or if you're going to introduce someone to the show and you want to go with season 2 to introduce it to them, these are the 5 I would say, and in this order. It's going to be The Letter, Marie's Meatballs, The Checkbook, Good Girls, and Traffic School. It was a little hard to come up with those 5 in that order, and there was a couple others that I'm like, yeah, maybe I should put there. And as much as I like a lot of the episodes, like Disc 1, I love all the episodes there. Disc 2, I like all the episodes there too. But when you have to narrow it down to 5, I feel that the latter half of this season, there were the 5 episodes that are stronger and give you a feel of the story of this season and of the show in its entirety a lot better. Although those 2 episodes from those discs can't get wrong. You can't get wrong with Mozart and any others, but if you want to narrow it down to 5, it's those 5. And of course, that's the end of season 2. Beginning with the next one, we're going to be going into season 3, the blue-cased season. And as I've mentioned a couple times before, not only is it my favorite season as a whole, it's also where the show begins to hit its creative stride. There are signs of that stride in the latter half of this season. Of course, and it also had its first classic episode here. But season 3 is where it really begins to hit its stride. And that stride goes from season 3 all the way up until season 6, debatedly into season 7.